Little girl left note on trucker's windshield saying, "Save us." What he found inside shocked America. The note was written in purple crayon on the back of a McDonald's napkin, pressed under the windshield wiper of Jake Roadhawk Morrison's Kenworth T680 at a rest stop outside Bakersfield, California. Jake almost didn't see it. He'd only stopped because his logbook mandated a 30-minute break, and he was running behind on a delivery of electronics to Seattle. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in March, the kind of bright California day that made everything look clean and safe and normal. Jake grabbed his coffee thermos, climbed down from the cab, and that's when he saw the splash of purple against his windshield. At first, he thought it was trash, some kid's artwork blown by the wind. Then he pulled it free and read the words that would change everything. "Save us. We're in the white RV. He hurt Mama. He has a gun. Please." The letters were shaky, some backwards, the writing of a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. There was a small handprint in the corner, pressed in what Jake initially thought was purple marker, but realized with a cold shock was dried blood. His eyes snapped up, scanning the rest stop. There were maybe 20 vehicles scattered across the parking area. 3 white RVs. His heart started hammering against his ribs. Jake Morrison was 51 years old, had been driving trucks for 28 years, and had a past he didn't talk about much. Before the trucks, he'd been a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, worked missing persons and child crimes for 12 years until a case went wrong and a little girl died because he'd followed protocol instead of his gut. He turned in his badge the next day, bought a truck, and spent nearly 3 decades trying to outrun that memory on America's highways. He told himself he was done being a hero, done making life-or-death decisions, done carrying the weight of other people's tragedies. But standing there with that purple crayon note in his hand, feeling the texture of dried blood under his thumb, he knew that was a lie he'd been telling himself for 28 years. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his eyes never leaving the 3 white RVs. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. "This is Jake Morrison at the westbound 58 rest stop, mile marker 112. I've received a note from a child indicating domestic violence in progress, possible hostage situation, armed suspect. I need units here now." The dispatcher's voice sharpened immediately, asking for details, but Jake was already moving, walking casually toward the rest stop building, angling for a better view of the RVs. He kept his phone to his ear, kept his voice calm and professional, slipping back into the cop cadence he thought he'd forgotten. 3 white RVs in the lot. I need to identify which one without alerting the suspect. Estimated response time. The dispatcher told him 8 minutes for highway patrol, maybe 12 for local sheriff. Jake's jaw clenched. In 12 minutes, a man with a gun and a hurt woman could disappear onto the highway, could take those kids somewhere no one would ever find them. The first white RV was a newer model Winnebago, elderly couple sitting outside in lawn chairs, reading books in the sunshine. The second was a beat-up coachman, empty, no signs of life. The third was a 32-foot Jayco, older model, windows covered with what looked like aluminum foil from the inside, generator running loud despite the mild weather, parked in the far corner of the lot away from other vehicles. Jake's cop instincts, rusty but not dead, started screaming. He moved closer, pretending to walk toward the vending machines, and that's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, dark hair in tangled pigtails, pressing her face against a tiny gap in the foil covering one window. Her eyes locked onto Jake's. She held up 3 fingers. Then she pointed down toward the ground and made a sleeping motion with her hands pressed together against her cheek. Then she held up 1 finger and made a gun shape with her other hand, pointing it at her own head. Jake understood immediately. 3 people inside, probably the little girl, her mother, and at least 1 other child. Mother unconscious or incapacitated, 1 armed man. The little girl had somehow slipped out, left the note, and gotten back inside without being caught. Brave kid, terrified kid, kid who was counting on him to do something right now. He turned away from the window, walked back toward his truck with forced casualness, and spoke quietly into his phone. "Dispatcher, I have visual confirmation. Third white RV, Jayco, California plates, far corner of the lot. I have eyes on one juvenile victim. She's indicating 3 victims total inside, 1 armed suspect, 1 victim possibly unconscious. This is active and urgent." The dispatcher's voice was tight now, professional but worried. "Sir, units are 6 minutes out. Do not approach the vehicle. Do not engage. Wait for law enforcement." Jake said something non-committal and hung up. 6 minutes was an eternity. 6 minutes was enough time for that man to realize the little girl had been gone, to check the windows, to see a trucker on the phone staring at his RV, to panic and do something irreversible. Jake had seen it before, back in his LAPD days. Domestic situations that went from tense to fatal in seconds because someone felt cornered. He couldn't just wait. But he also couldn't storm an RV with an armed suspect and 3 hostages inside. He needed a plan, needed an angle, needed something that would get those victims out without anyone dying. He keyed his CB radio to Channel 19. "Any truckers at the westbound 58 rest stop? This is Roadhawk. I need assistance immediately. Emergency situation. Possible lives at stake. Need bodies. Need presence. Need it now." The CB crackled. A woman's voice came back, sharp and alert. "This is Diamondback. I'm at the fuel pumps. What do you need?" Then a man's voice, older, gravelly. "Silverback here. Park near the restrooms. Talk to me, Roadhawk." Then another, younger. "Fastball, I'm here. What's going on?" Within 90 seconds, Jake had 4 other truckers converging on his position, and he laid it out fast and clear. Got a domestic violence situation in that Jayco RV, far corner. Kids inside, woman hurt, armed suspect. Highway patrol is 4 minutes out. I need us to create a situation where that man feels surrounded but not threatened, where his only option is to stay put and wait for the cops instead of running or hurting anyone. I need a wall of trucks and truckers, visible but not aggressive. Can you help me? There was no hesitation. Diamondback, whose real name was Rita Vasquez, 43 years old, former Army combat medic, said she'd position her Peterbilt to block the RV's rear exit. Silverback, real name Thomas Grant, 62, Vietnam vet, said he'd take the left flank. Fastball, real name Derek Chen, 29, former college baseball player turned trucker, said he'd cover the right. Another trucker Jake hadn't heard from, a woman who identified herself as Phoenix, said she'd park her truck at the lot entrance to guide the police in. Within 3 minutes, 4 massive trucks had repositioned themselves in a loose semicircle around the Jayco RV, not close enough to be threatening, but close enough that leaving would require maneuvering around them. The truckers themselves stood in casual groups near their vehicles, visible, present, a silent statement that this RV was being watched. Jake approached the RV door alone. He'd changed into a clean shirt, tucked his phone in his pocket with 911 still connected and recording, and put on the most non-threatening expression he could manage. He knocked 3 firm raps. "Hello in the RV. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm a trucker, not a cop, not a threat. I saw your RV and wanted to check if you folks need any help. Jumper cables, directions, anything like that. Just being neighborly." His voice was friendly, casual, the voice of a guy who helps strangers at rest stops all the time. Inside the RV, he heard movement, a man's voice cursing, a child's whimper quickly silenced. The door cracked open 6 inches. A man's face appeared, mid-40s, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed and wild. He smelled like whiskey and sweat. His right hand was behind the door, undoubtedly holding the gun the little girl had warned about. "We're fine. Don't need help. Leave us alone." The man's voice was aggressive but shaky, the voice of someone running on adrenaline and bad decisions. Jake kept his expression neutral, friendly. Just a helpful trucker. No problem, friend. Just wanted to make sure. You know how it is, we truckers look out for each other. Look out for folks on the road. You traveling far? The man's eyes darted past Jake, seeing the trucks, seeing the other truckers watching. His face went pale. What is this? What the hell is this? Jake raised his hands slowly, palms out, non-threatening. Easy, friend. Just truckers taking a break. This is a rest stop. People park here. Nothing to worry about. But I gotta tell you, I'm concerned. I found a note that suggested someone in your RV might need help. Now, I'm not accusing you of anything, but I've got a legal obligation to make sure everyone in there is okay. So how about you let me see your family, let me verify everyone's safe, and then we can all go about our day. The man's hand tightened on whatever he was holding behind the door. You need to mind your own business. You need to get back in your truck and drive away. This is my family, my business. Jake's voice stayed calm, but gained an edge of steel. See, that's where you're wrong. When a child asks for help, it becomes everyone's business. And right now, you've got 5 truckers, all with phones, all with cameras, all watching this RV. You've got highway patrol about 2 minutes away, because yes, I called them. And you've got a choice. You can open this door, let those kids and that woman walk out safe, and deal with whatever consequences come like a man. Or you can make this worse, and I promise you, it will get worse. Those truckers behind me, 3 of them are veterans, 1's a former medic, and me? I used to be LAPD, worked child crimes for 12 years. I know how this ends if you make bad choices. So let's make good choices. Let's get those kids to safety. The man's face twisted with rage and fear and desperation. He started to raise his right hand, started to bring the gun around. Jake moved on pure instinct, muscle memory from 2 decades of police training taking over. He slammed his shoulder into the RV door, driving it inward, catching the man off balance. The gun, a small revolver, fired once, the bullet punching through the RV's thin wall and disappearing into the sky. Jake grabbed the man's wrist, twisted hard, and the gun clattered to the floor. Behind him, he heard running footsteps as the other truckers rushed to help. Rita Vasquez was through the door in seconds. Her combat medic training evident in how she immediately went to the woman lying on the floor, checking pulse and breathing. The woman was alive, bruised, and bleeding from a head wound, but alive. The 2 children, the 7-year-old girl who'd written the note and her younger brother, who looked about 4, were huddled in the back of the RV, clutching each other. The little girl looked at Jake with huge, terrified eyes and whispered, "You came. You really came." Jake felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for 28 years. "Yeah, sweetheart, I came. You're safe now. Both of you are safe. Your mama's gonna be okay, I promise." The man, whose name turned out to be Derek Paulson, was the woman's ex-boyfriend, had violated a restraining order, had tracked her and the kids across 3 states, had cornered them at this rest stop and beaten her when she tried to call for help. The little girl, whose name was Sophie Martinez, had waited until Derek passed out drunk for a few minutes, had slipped out the emergency window, had run through the parking lot looking for help and chosen Jake's truck because it had a stuffed bear hanging in the window, and she thought that meant he was nice. She'd climbed up on the fuel tank step, left her note, and climbed back through the window before Derek woke up. She was 7 years old, and she'd saved her family with purple crayon and incredible courage. The highway patrol arrived 90 seconds after Jake disarmed Derek Paulson. They found a scene that was already secured, a suspect already restrained by 5 truckers who knew how to handle themselves, 2 children being comforted by Rita Vasquez, and a woman receiving first aid from Thomas Grant, who'd done field medicine in Vietnam. The lead officer, a sergeant named Maria Delgado, looked at the scene and then at Jake. She recognized him. She'd been a rookie when he was still on the force, had heard the stories about the detective who quit after a case went wrong. Morrison? Jake Morrison? Is that you? Jake nodded, suddenly exhausted. Yeah, it's me. Sergeant Delgado looked at the children, at the injured woman, at Derek Paulson handcuffed and sitting on the ground. Looks like you haven't lost your touch. Jake looked at Sophie, who was holding her little brother and watching him with absolute trust. Maybe I just found it again. The case against Derek Paulson was overwhelming. Kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, violation of a restraining order, child endangerment, attempted murder. The DA threw every charge that would stick. Sophie's testimony, delivered via closed-circuit video because she was too young and traumatized to face her attacker in court, was heartbreaking and powerful. She described months of escalating violence, her mother's attempts to escape, Derek's threats to kill them all if they ever left. She described writing the note, climbing out the window, choosing Jake's truck because of the teddy bear. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. Guilty on all counts, Derek Paulson got 35 years without possibility of parole. Sophie's mother, Maria Martinez, recovered from her injuries after 3 days in the hospital. She had a fractured skull, broken ribs, and extensive bruising, but she was alive and her children were safe. When she was released, she asked to meet the truckers who'd saved her family. They gathered at a diner near the hospital, 5 truckers who'd been strangers before that day at the rest stop. Maria held Sophie and her son Carlos close and tried to find words big enough for what she felt. You gave us our lives back. You gave my children a future. How do I ever repay that? Rita Vasquez, Diamondback, spoke for all of them. You don't repay it. You live. You heal. You teach your babies that there are good people in the world who will help when you need it. And someday, when you see someone who needs help, you be that person for them. That's how this works. But Jake Morrison stayed after the others left. He sat across from Maria and Sophie in that diner booth, and Sophie looked at him with those serious 7-year-old eyes and asked the question that would define the rest of his life. Why did you help us? You didn't know us. You could have driven away. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about a case 28 years ago, a little girl he hadn't saved, a guilt he'd carried across 1,000,000 miles of highway. Then he looked at Sophie and told her the truth. A long time ago, I didn't help someone when I should have. I've regretted it every day since. You gave me a chance to do it right this time. You gave me a chance to be the person I should have been all along. So really, you saved me just as much as I saved you. Sophie reached across the table and put her small hand on Jake's. Her palm still had a faint purple stain from the crayon. You're a hero. Jake felt tears sting his eyes for the first time in decades. No, sweetheart. You're the hero. You saved your family. I just showed up. Sophie smiled, a real smile, the first one Jake had seen from her. Then we're both heroes. Jake laughed, a sound that felt rusty and new and right. Yeah, I guess we are. The story hit the news 3 days later. Local stations first, then national networks, then social media where it exploded. Trucker saves family after girl leaves note became former detective turned trucker rescues children, became highway hero, the purple crayon that saved 3 lives. Jake's phone started ringing with interview requests. Good Morning America wanted him. CNN wanted him. The Today Show wanted him. He turned them all down except one. Sophie's mother had started a Facebook page to thank the truckers and share their story, and Jake agreed to do one interview with a local reporter, on the condition that the focus stayed on Sophie's courage and the trucker community's willingness to help, not on him. The interview aired on a Friday evening. Jake, uncomfortable in a button-down shirt instead of his usual flannel, sat next to Rita, Thomas, Derek Chen, and Phoenix, whose real name was Amanda Reeves. They told the story simply, without drama, just facts. A child asked for help. They helped. That's what truckers do. That's what decent people do. The reporter asked Jake about his past, about being a detective, about why he'd left the force. Jake's answer was honest and raw. "I made a mistake once. A child died because I followed rules instead of my gut. I've spent 28 years running from that, driving trucks, keeping my head down, telling myself I was done being responsible for other people's lives." But Sophie reminded me that we're all responsible for each other. We're all connected. And when someone asks for help, especially a child, you don't get to look away. You don't get to say it's not your problem. You help, period. The interview went viral. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed 12 million times. Comments poured in by the thousands. People sharing their own stories of truckers who'd helped them, of strangers who'd intervened, of small acts of courage that changed lives. The Trucking Association reached out to Jake and the other 4 truckers, wanting to feature them in a safety campaign about recognizing signs of domestic violence and human trafficking. Jake agreed, on the condition that Sophie and her mother were comfortable with it. They were. Maria Martinez said that if their story could help even one other family, then something good would come from their nightmare. The campaign launched 6 months later. See Something, Save Someone featured photos of Jake, Rita, Thomas, Derek, and Amanda standing in front of their trucks with Sophie's purple crayon note reproduced in the background. The tagline was simple: "A child's cry for help can come in many forms. Will you be ready to answer?" The campaign included training materials for truckers on recognizing trafficking, abuse, and kidnapping situations. It included hotline numbers, legal guidance, and step-by-step protocols for intervention. Within a year, the campaign had been adopted by every major trucking company in America. Within 2 years, it had led to 47 rescues of children and adults from dangerous situations, all because truckers knew what to look for and weren't afraid to get involved. Jake Morrison's life changed in ways he never expected. He still drove trucks, still loved the road, but now he also volunteered with the Truckers Against Trafficking organization, speaking at conferences and training sessions. He carried Sophie's original note, laminated and faded, in his wallet. He spoke to groups of new truckers about awareness and intervention. He told them about the little girl with the purple crayon who'd chosen to trust a stranger with a teddy bear in his window. He told them that every single one of them had the power to save a life, and that power came with responsibility. "You're not just drivers," he'd say. "You're the eyes and ears of America's highways. You see things other people don't see. You go places other people don't go. And sometimes you're the only hope someone has. Don't waste that. Don't look away. Be the person who stops. Be the person who helps. Be the person who saves someone." Sophie Martinez, now 8 years old, was thriving. She and her brother Carlos lived with their mother in a safe apartment in Sacramento, far from Derek Paulson and the life they'd escaped. Sophie was in therapy, working through her trauma, but she was also strong and resilient and determined to help other kids like her. She started a program at her school called Purple Crayon Project, where kids learned about safety, about asking for help, about trusting their instincts. She collected crayons and notebooks to donate to shelters and safe houses, so other kids would have tools to communicate if they needed help. She was 8 years old and she was changing the world, one purple crayon at a time. Jake visited Sophie and her family every few months when his routes brought him through Sacramento. He'd become Uncle Jake, the trucker who'd saved them, the friend who'd stayed. He brought Carlos toy trucks and brought Sophie books about brave girls and heroes. They'd have dinner together, Maria's homemade tamales that reminded Jake of family dinners he'd had decades ago. And they'd talk about life and healing and moving forward. Sophie always asked about Jake's travels, about the roads he'd driven, about the people he'd met. And Jake would tell her stories, true stories about truckers helping stranded motorists, about drivers who'd spotted fires and called them in before they spread, about the invisible network of good people rolling across America's highways, watching out for each other. On the 1-year anniversary of the rescue, Sophie asked Jake a question that caught him off guard. Do you think you were meant to be at that rest stop that day? Like, do you think it was fate or destiny or something? Jake thought about the delivery that had been running late, about the mandatory rest break, about the teddy bear in his window that had made a terrified little girl trust him. He thought about 28 years of running from his past, of trying to escape responsibility, of telling himself he was done being a hero. And he thought about how one purple crayon note had brought him back to himself, had reminded him who he was supposed to be. I don't know about fate, he said, but I know that every choice we make leads us somewhere. I chose to stop at that rest stop. You chose to write that note. We both chose to trust each other. And those choices saved lives. Maybe that's what destiny is. Just a series of choices that lead us to where we're supposed to be. Sophie smiled, that bright, fearless smile that showed she was going to be okay, that she was stronger than what had happened to her. I'm glad you made that choice. I'm glad I made mine. Jake felt that crack in his chest widen, felt light pouring into places that had been dark for decades. Me too, kiddo. Me too. The 5 truckers who'd helped that day stayed in touch, forming a bond that went beyond the CB radio chatter and truck stop small talk. They called themselves the Purple Crayon Convoy in private, though they'd never used that name publicly because it wasn't about them. It was about Sophie and every other child who needed help. But they checked in on each other, shared information about suspicious situations they'd seen. Coordinated responses when someone spotted something wrong. They became a model for what trucker communities could be, not just drivers sharing the road, but protectors watching over the vulnerable. Rita Vasquez used her combat medic training to start teaching first aid courses specifically designed for truckers, free classes at truck stops across the Southwest. Thomas Grant became a volunteer with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, using his decades of road experience to help track movement patterns and identify potential trafficking route. Amanda Reeves partnered with rest stop management companies to improve lighting, add emergency call boxes, and create safe zones for people who needed help. They all did it quietly, without fanfare, because that's what truckers do. They see a problem, they fix it. They see someone who needs help, they help. 3 years after that March afternoon at the rest stop, Jake Morrison was invited to speak at a law enforcement conference in Los Angeles. He almost declined. LA was where his old life had been, where the case had gone wrong, where the little girl had died because he'd followed protocol instead of instinct. But Sophie, now 10 years old and wise beyond her years, told him he should go. You need to forgive yourself, Uncle Jake. You need to tell those police officers that sometimes the rules aren't enough. Sometimes you have to trust your heart. So Jake went. He stood in front of 300 cops, detectives, and federal agents, and he told them about Sophie's purple crayon note. He told them about the choice he'd made to intervene instead of just waiting for backup. And he told them about the case 28 years ago, the one that had broken him, the little girl he hadn't saved because he'd waited for a warrant that came 2 hours too late. His voice cracked when he described finding her body. His hands shook when he talked about turning in his badge, and his eyes were clear and steady when he said what he'd learned. Rules exist for good reasons. Protocols keep us safe and keep us legal, but sometimes, in the moment, you have to make a choice between following the rules and saving a life. And if you choose wrong, if you wait too long, if you let procedure override humanity, you'll carry that weight forever. I carried it for 28 years. A 7-year-old girl with a purple crayon gave me a chance to put it down. She reminded me that we became cops, became truckers, became whatever we are, because we wanted to help people. And helping people sometimes means taking risks, breaking rules, trusting your gut even when your training says wait. I'm not telling you to be reckless. I'm telling you to be human. I'm telling you that the person who needs your help doesn't care about your protocols. They just need you to show up. The room was silent when he finished. Then a detective in the front row, a woman, maybe 30 years old, stood up and started clapping. Then another stood. Then another. Within seconds, 300 law enforcement officers were on their feet, applauding a former detective-turned-trucker who'd reminded them why they'd taken their oaths in the first place. Jake stood there, overwhelmed, and thought about Sophie watching this speech on video later, proud of her Uncle Jake for facing his past. He thought about Maria Martinez, rebuilding her life with her children in Sacramento. He thought about Derek Paulson, rotting in prison where he belonged. And he thought about the little girl from 28 years ago, the one he hadn't saved, and he whispered an apology and a promise. "I'm sorry I was too late for you, but I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I'm not too late for anyone else." Jake Morrison is 54 years old now. He still drives his Kenworth T680, still hauls electronics and furniture and whatever needs moving across America's highways. But he's not running anymore. He's not hiding from his past or his responsibility or his capacity to make a difference. He's just a trucker, rolling down the road, watching for purple crayon notes and keeping his CB radio tuned to Channel 19 in case someone needs help. He's got a teddy bear hanging in his window, the same one that made Sophie trust him, and he's got her note in his wallet, a reminder that courage comes in all sizes and that one small act can change everything. Sophie Martinez is 11 now, in 6th grade, still running her Purple Crayon project, still helping other kids learn to ask for help and trust the good people in the world. She wants to be a social worker when she grows up, wants to help families escape violence and find safety. She writes to Jake regularly, emails and letters and occasional video calls when their schedules align. She tells him about school and friends and her little brother Carlos, who wants to be a trucker just like Uncle Jake. And Jake writes back, telling her about the roads he's traveled and the sunrises he's seen and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he's exactly where he's supposed to be. Because that's what the Purple Crayon note taught him, that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about choosing differently in the present. That heroism isn't about being fearless, it's about acting despite the fear. That family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up when you need them most. And that sometimes, salvation comes in the form of a 7-year-old girl with purple crayon and the courage to ask a stranger for help. The road is long, and the nights are dark, and the miles stretch endlessly ahead. But somewhere on that highway, there's always someone who needs help. There's always a note waiting to be found, a call waiting to be answered, a life waiting to be saved. And as long as there are truckers like Jake Morrison rolling down that road, watching and listening, and ready to stop when it matters, there's hope. There's always hope. Because we're all just trying to get home safe. And sometimes we need someone to show us the way. Sometimes we need a hero with a teddy bear in the window and the courage to answer a purple crayon cry for help. Sometimes we need to be that hero for someone else. That's the promise of the highway. That's the code of the road. That's what it means to be human in a world that sometimes forgets its humanity. Jake Morrison remembers. Sophie Martinez remembers. And because they remember, because they chose courage over convenience and action over apathy, 3 lives were saved and countless others were inspired. That's the legacy of the Purple Crayon note. That's the power of one small act of bravery meeting one trucker's willingness to help. That's the story that shocked America and reminded us all that heroes don't wear capes. They drive 18-wheelers, and they stop when children ask for help. 10-4, good buddy. Keep your eyes open and your heart ready, because somewhere out there, someone's writing a note, and they're praying you'll be the one to find it. Don't let them down. Never let them down. That's the trucker's promise. That's the highway code. That's who we are when we're at our best. And that's the story Jake Morrison carries with him, mile after mile, year after year. A reminder that it's never too late to be the person you were always meant to be.